Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tuning in North. My name is Matt Payton, and I am Chief Executive of Radiocentre, and it's great to be back here in Manchester for a morning of all things radio and audio. We've got a packed morning ahead and some brilliant speakers, but I just wanted to start by making a few opening remarks before I hand over to our host for today and set the scene about what we've got coming up and how our agenda all fits together and how this reflects some of the exciting developments that are happening in audio and touch on some of the things that we've been doing to help unlock what we call the audio advantage. Firstly, though, I think it's important to say that the fact that we're holding this event here in Manchester is no accident, and not just because I like the way the Manchester skyline looks these days. The Northwest has always been and remains a hotbed of creativity and a real hub of the creative industries, including radio and the wider audio sector, some of which we heard in those opening clips this morning. And as many of you know, last year marked 50 years since commercial radio first came to Manchester with the original Piccadilly Radio breaking new ground as one of the first commercial radio stations outside of London. And we've come such a long way since those early days. Fast forward 50 years, and the radio market has changed beyond all recognition, with more choice and competition than ever before. Here in Manchester, you can now access an incredible 50 national commercial radio stations and over 30 local stations, not to mention the almost infinite choice that's now available in terms of music streaming and podcasts. So it's pretty remarkable that commercial radio in the Northwest has actually grown its audience in recent years, now reaching an incredible 4.6 million people each week, up almost 30% in the last 5 years. So what is it that underpins this growth and the resilience of radio? And how is it evolving as part now of a much broader audio world? And how can advertisers unlock this audio advantage? Well, fortunately, as I say, we've got some incredible speakers this morning to help address some of these questions and more over the course of this morning, with representatives from across media and advertising, covering a diverse range of issues from commercial strategies and creativity to the evolution of audio. Although the eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted a last-minute change to our lineup, sadly the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Lisa Nandy, has had to pull out at the last minute. However, she has sent us a video message that I'll introduce shortly, but I think that's what you get for booking politicians sometimes. But look, what's great about these sessions that we have got is that they all relate in some way to at least one of our themes for today. That radio continues to deliver a really powerful impact due to the public value it provides and the connection that it has with audiences. That innovation in audio is helping to drive change and create more opportunities than ever for audiences and for advertisers. And that there's significant and growing evidence of radio's effectiveness as an advertising medium with great and consistent creativity at the heart of those campaigns that get the best results. And just to illustrate this point, this is a reminder of the organisations that we've got speaking today and that you'll be hearing from, and how we see their contributions fitting together, with presentations on the impact of radio and media, views on innovation in audio, particularly from our media agency partners, and some great examples of radio's effectiveness. But before we get started, I also think it's worth reminding ourselves and taking stock of how audio is actually performing in this highly competitive media world. And as part of this, I think it's always worth reminding ourselves that we start from a position of relative strength, which isn't something you can say for every media channel, with a record 40 million people now tuning into commercial radio each week, with our combined audiences reaching over 8 million more listeners than the BBC's radio services, and delivering a record share of listening. But while it's great to see radio, linear radio, alive and well, it's also crucial to recognise that radio is now part of this much broader audio sector, competing for audiences and for advertising alongside podcasts and music streaming platforms. But the good news is that overall listening to total audio is also expanding. The cake is growing for everybody. With commercial audio, the bit that's actually you can take advertising and it's funded by advertising, seeing real growth in its scale and capacity. And that's a theme that I want to return to later with the launch of a new study that we carried out recently with the consultancy MTM. But the strength of audio listening is only part of the story. Ad revenues have also seen significant growth over the past 10 years, despite that continuing shift in advertising budgets to digital media platforms. And while there was an inevitable dip during COVID, we've seen revenues bounce back strongly and are consistently now ahead of pre-pandemic levels. Now, of course, there has been some uncertainty in the ad market over the last 12 months, reflecting the position in the wider economy. But we've also seen some hopeful signs for radio. In fact, last year we were quoted as saying that 2024 could be one of the best ever years for commercial radio. And today we can reveal to you that full year revenues for 2024 did in fact see an increase, up by 3.2% on the previous year, no mean feat against the economic backdrop, reaching 738 million for the year as a whole. So agonizingly close to that record year of 740 million a couple of years ago. So certainly one of our best ever years, if not quite a new record. So given this positive news on audiences and on revenues, I think it's worth considering how radio has been able to sustain this position. And the truth is, it's not been easy. It's required significant investment in content and talent and the rollout of new digital services to help build audiences and provide new solutions for advertisers. In effect, radio's had to reinvent itself for the 21st century. And in doing so, it's needed to focus relentlessly on those themes that I mentioned earlier, namely effectiveness, impact, and innovation. With effectiveness, I'm pleased to say that at Radiocentre, we have one of the most highly regarded and respected insight teams working in media. Over a number of years, they built up a formidable evidence base demonstrating the effectiveness of radio and audio. As a result, we like to say that we've got more publicly available effectiveness evidence than any other media channel, covering everything from return on investment to emotional and creative effects of audio and supporting both short-term and long-term marketing strategies. You only need to look at the Radiocentre website to get a sense of the range and depth of the resources available and some of the thought leadership that the team provide. Of course, the benefits of radio go beyond just those results for advertisers. It also has a significant impact on our everyday lives and is a force for good in society, not only because of its connection, but also because of the high levels of trust that it retains compared to other media, cutting through with a wide range of audiences at key times of day. In fact, radio is consistently found to be among the most trusted sources of news, including in this latest research that we commissioned last year, with almost 70% of listeners agreeing that radio news is factual and true, compared to only 27% saying the same for social media. So radio's effectiveness and its broader impact are pretty well established. And these attributes remain crucial, even as technology and innovation change the landscape, with developments in technology making it much easier to access and to listen to different types of audio. Now, initially, that was the rise of MP3 players and smartphones, but in recent years, increasingly, it's been through smart speakers with voice activation, like the Amazon Alexa. Now, while these devices offer many functions and are likely to get even smarter with the rollout of different sort of AI interfaces that we're hearing about, a lot of the time, the fact is they're just being used as clever radios. According to Radio Armidus, the vast majority of listening time on smart speakers, around 70%, is to live radio. And radio is embracing the opportunities in this area with new services and solutions for advertisers, including interactive and shoppable ads. And these opportunities are only likely to grow when you look at the share of listening that's happening online. Up to 27% in the latest radar, and even higher for commercial radio, actually, well over 30%. And as you can see, there's been a real surge in radio listening online in recent years, more than doubling over the past 5 years alone. And it's actually smart speaker listening, when you look at the numbers, the orange shade now on this chart, that appears to be driving this growth. And we've only had separate figures for smart speakers, I think now since 2022. But this shows that it now accounts for 16% of all listening, of total radio listening, and the majority of online listening. So as a result, radio is becoming even more reliant on tech platforms, particularly Amazon and Google, to reach its audiences. And those relationships have been pretty good and mutually beneficial so far. But it does create real risks for the future. For example, what if the platforms start to look to exploit their position and charge to carry radio stations? Or stop providing easy access to UK radio and divert listeners to their own content? And what happens if Amazon or Google want to start inserting their own ads around UK radio content? Well, because of those risks and the public value that radio provides, we spent a lot of time in the past couple of years talking to our friends in Parliament to establish some ground rules on how radio is offered, accessed, and commercialised in future. We were convinced this could be done relatively simply and actually in everyone's interests. But coming up with that solution is only part of the story. We then had to convince government that these changes should become law and get them through Parliament before the last election, which was no mean feat and not an easy task. But I have to say we were helped no end actually by the cross-party support that we had on this issue, including the then Shadow Minister, Steph Peacock, who's now one of the ministers within DCMS. And as a result, I'm pleased to say, following a lot of hard work, we managed to secure support for radio within the government's media bill, which then became the Media Act in May 2024. So what does that mean in practice, and what does it do for radio exactly? Well, it will look to secure the future of radio specifically on these voice assistant platforms. So it provides new powers to regulate those platforms provided by the likes of Amazon and Google to ensure that radio stations are always available and discoverable, that they're provided reliably on request, that there's no fees for making radio stations available, or any unauthorized advertising, so platforms can't start overlaying their own advertising around radio content. And that broadcasters can choose their own default streaming route, which sounds pretty technical, but it basically means they can choose whether to provide it on their own platform like a global player or Rayo, or their own app, or an aggregator like Radio Player or TuneIn. But the legislation itself isn't the end of the story. In fact, it's probably more accurate to describe it as the end of the beginning, with the next phase only getting underway very recently, as Ofcom starts the process of deciding how to nominate or designate particular voice assistants that will be subject to these new requirements. And that's, okay, it's a fairly technical process, but it's crucial in making this new regime work in practice. It would be a huge own goal if the Media Act, having got it through, included loopholes or provided the opportunity for the platforms to game the system. So we're looking forward to working with Ofcom and our friends at DCMS to ensure that we get this right. On a separate note, helping to shape the digital future for audio also means working alongside and competing with the BBC. And in many ways, that's business as usual. We've always competed fiercely with the BBC for audiences, and competition, of course, is a fact of life. But competition also needs to be on terms that are fair and reasonable and take into account the huge funding and promotional advantages that the BBC has. What it shouldn't mean is the BBC launching copycat radio stations that could put commercial services out of business, or start running advertising across audio and podcast output that's already been paid for by the license fee. So don't get me wrong, look, the BBC is a fantastic institution. It's got a big role to play in audio, but it also needs proper guardrails in place as it looks to drive its own digital expansion. No doubt these and other issues that we'll be discussing with government over the coming months once the BBC Charter and the funding review gets underway. But what I think all these developments show is actually the fundamentals of radio remain really strong, and that radio is now part of this much broader audio market, which is only going to grow in importance. And it's against this backdrop that Radiocentre has been changing too and evolving to ensure that we reflect the changes happening in the world around us. In fact, one of the first things I did in this role was to make a formal change in our remit to represent and promote all forms of audio provided by commercial broadcasters. In short, we're not just about linear radio anymore. And hopefully you see that reflected in what we've got coming up today. Of course, radio remains our core focus. It's still the heart of what we do and what our members do. But now we're also reflecting the leading role of commercial broadcasters in digital audio and podcasts, and the creative opportunities across all radio and all audio. And it's this broader perspective we'll be providing this morning in keeping with that expanded remit. So that's about it from me for now. I hope that gives you a flavour of what's coming up today and why, how this reflects some of the big issues in radio and audio, and how commercial radio is evolving as part of this. Thanks for listening.